Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
Hey, it's our all-English unit, so we're only going to be speaking in English. There's no Chinese teacher, so we're going to try to speak a little more clearly, and try to stay away from so much Chinese. Sometimes it slips out. I can't promise that Tom won't try to say some Japanese, though.
Yeah, I was going to say the concept of an all-English unit probably means that we're going to speak in English with no Chinese, and that does not mean that we can't sneak in a word or phrase in of French or Spanish or Russian or even Japanese.
Why not?
And we might do that as well. But yeah, we're not supposed to speak any Chinese during our program. And today, of course, it's our News Watch unit. And we've got a couple of stories here. It all has to do with food and producing food. I guess because the population is increasing, we need to be more aware of possible food shortages, both in terms of production of the food and distribution. But our stories are about avocados and a substitute for them, and also urban farming in Singapore. So let's get to it, everybody. Let's read through the contents of our lesson for today, and we'll be right back to discuss it. Avocados are a delicious and highly sought-after fruit. However, growing them is water-intensive, and shipping them to the four corners of the world is environmentally destructive. Luckily for avocado lovers in the UK, Arina Shokohi has come up with an alternative. She created Ecovado for the final project of her master's degree from the University of the Arts London's Design College, Central St. Martin's. The rich and nutty flavor of the avocado's pale green flesh was Shokohi's starting point. She worked with Jack Wallman, a food scientist at the University of Nottingham, to analyze the fruit's composition. Wallman also helped Shokohi figure out how to find suitable ingredients to include in her substitute. She settled on broad beans, hazelnuts, apples, and canola oil, choosing them not only for their flavor and texture, but also for their local availability. This makes the Ecovado even more sustainable. As an added bonus, the wax skin of the fruit can even be melted down to form a candle.
Singapore puts its own twist on urban farming. In the concrete jungle of Singapore, plants have begun to sprout in peculiar places. Land comes at a premium in Singapore, where 5.5 million people live on less than 730 square kilometers. Since 2020, about a dozen rooftop plots have been leased to farmers. These unusual agricultural developments are supported by the government, which wants to increase domestic food production to 30% by 2030. Planting on parking lot rooftops is thus a space-efficient way of meeting the government's goal. Since this endeavor began in the midst of 2020's pandemic, it's unsurprising that it's had a bit of a slow start. Even removing COVID-19 from the equation, farming is an expensive business. The current rooftop farmers receive subsidies from the government. However, some farms are showing impressive yields already. One farm reports up to 400 kilograms of produce on some days, depending on the crop being harvested. Realistically, though, if Singapore intends to meet its goal, it will need innovations, not just funding for more rooftop farms.
Okay, there you have it, a couple of news stories that have to do with producing food. So let's talk about avocados. That's a kind of fruit or vegetable. I'm not quite sure exactly what it is. It is considered a fruit here, but it does kind of look like a vegetable to me. But in any case, we're considering it a fruit. It's green, and I believe it's grown here in Taiwan as well. I've seen it for sale in local markets. And there's a student in the UK who has designed a substitute substitute for avocados. So here, substitute just means something that takes the place of something else, especially if the original one is not available or if you want to find something that is better than the original, etc., etc. You might find a substitute, for example, if you're working and you have to work on Friday night at the restaurant, but the next day you have a big test that you want to study for, so you might try to find a substitute, and substitute can also be used as a verb. Can you substitute for me on Friday night? Sometimes we just shorten it to sub. I need to find a sub for my shift on Friday night.
Right. Yeah, avocados are one of my favorite things. You can say avocado or avocado. I hear lots of different pronunciations for it. I grew up with two kinds. There's the smaller size that they have to import from California into Taiwan. It's called the Hass, Haas, Hass avocado. They're quite expensive, but boy, are they good. But you have to wait for a little while until they soften up. The ones they grow here in Taiwan are more like the ones we call Florida avocados. They're bigger, and they're tasty too. I like them as well. Like Tom, I grew up thinking they were a vegetable, not a fruit, but technically they are considered to be a fruit, and they have kind of that a green exterior. If you're talking about the Hass avocado that comes from California, it's got a rough kind of dimpled skin on the outside. They're very healthy, and they're quite delicious. They've got a lot of good fat in them, lots of minerals and vitamins. They're a really terrific thing to feed your body.
Indeed, and they, of course, are often used in cooking. The only place I've seen them in cooking is when you make guacamole sauce, or I guess it's a paste or something that is used in Mexican food. But still, it is consumed here in Taiwan in various ways. And yes, indeed, it is a delicious and highly sought-after fruit, which means lots of people like it and they want to buy it and eat it. However, growing them is water-intensive, and shipping them to the four corners of the world is environmentally destructive. Indeed, some kinds of plants do require a lot of water. I can give you one example. I believe almonds require lots and lots of water to grow, whereas there are other kinds of food that don't require a lot of water to grow. But in any case, apparently avocados, along with almonds, require a lot of water to produce.
So does rice, if you think about it. You need water to grow fruits and vegetables. Here we're talking about one that is also hard to ship around the world. As most of you have noticed, it's getting harder and harder to get shipping containers to one part of the world from another part. We don't have enough fuel anymore. It's just lots of problems. So some people are trying to figure out, especially countries, what they can produce themselves, so we're not always relying on imports. We hope that we can continue exporting things from Taiwan, though, to sell to other countries. We have such great things that are grown here. So if you're saying that something's destructive, it's ruining something, it's hurting something, you can have something that's physically destructive, like if someone blows up a building, but you can also have something that's emotionally destructive. Maybe you've been in a relationship with someone who doesn't appreciate you and hurts your feelings. That can be a destructive relationship. Yeah.
Indeed. And of course, luckily, in the UK, for avocado lovers there, in the United Kingdom of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, Arena Shokohi has come up with an alternative. So yes, indeed, if it's difficult to produce the avocado without using a lot of water, or if it requires a lot of money to ship it around the world, well, she's come up with a substitute or an alternative, and she created something called Ecovado. Okay, that does sound like the word avocado, but this is a substitute for avocados. Ecovado, and that was the final project she produced for her master's degree from some university in London there, University of Arts, London. And she was in the design college, which is called Central St. Martin's. Maybe you've gone there before, maybe you've studied there before, or maybe you know someone who has.
I actually don't know anyone who's gone there before, but it sounds like a cool place to go to school. Now, notice she was getting her master's degree, and sometimes for a master's degree program, you either have to write a thesis or come up with a business plan, depending on what kind of program you're in. So her final project required her to come up with something very creative and clever. And she was, again, going to a design college there in Central St. Martin's. Moving on to paragraph 2, we're describing kind of the taste of an avocado. It's a rich taste because it's got a lot of healthy fats in it. It also has a little bit of a nutty flavor. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have now tasted avocados. They're quite popular in Taiwan, especially now. You can go to restaurants and order something called avocado toast, which is kind of the cool, kind of yuppie thing to eat. It's very healthy, and it's not quite as fattening as pancakes or maybe French toast. But it does have quite a rich and nutty flavor. And that was where she started. If you talk about where someone started on some sort of project or some idea, sometimes they'll use that phrase, this was her starting point, where she tended to focus first on.
Exactly. So I guess she's starting with the flavor of the avocado and its pale green flesh. So she needed to understand the nature of the meat or the flesh of that fruit. So she worked with Jack Wallman, a food scientist at the University of Nottingham, or Nottingham, I guess you'd say, if you were in the UK, to analyze the fruit's composition. So here we've got the word composition. That just talks about the nature of something, how it's made up, its ingredients, and things like that. So indeed, if you're trying to copy the formula for a famous soft drink or something, you might try to study the composition of that product so that you can make a copy of it, like how much water does it contain, how much sugar, how much citric acid or whatever. Those are all the ingredients. So you want to find out about the composition. I should also mention that the word composition can mean a paper that you write in school.
Sure.
Your teacher may give you an assignment to write a composition. You need to write a composition on a particular subject. It's due like next month or something. Hand it in for a good grade.
Yeah, usually when I see composition and we're talking about writing, I think more of creative writing. If you're giving a research paper as an assignment, that seems to involve more research and looking up other facts and quoting other people who have done research on a particular topic. But if you had a composition in class, it was usually kind of a creative writing assignment, which I never enjoyed. I'd rather do a research paper, to be honest. But some people out there really like to write creatively. So this was what she decided to do. Just look at the fruit's composition and work with this guy, Jack Wallman, of food scientists. That's kind of a cool job these days. Probably some of their work is figuring out what's in a particular dish or how many calories are in a dish. Nowadays, everybody wants to know, how many calories, how many grams of carbs and fat are in this particular dish that I want to order or buy in the supermarket. Well, she decided to find some good ingredients to include in her substitute. She settled on broad beans. Those are like green beans, guys, and hazelnuts, which you'll often find in good chocolate that you can buy here. Apples, canola oil, choosing them not only for their flavor and texture, but also for their local availability. I have to warn you about canola oil, though. It's not very healthy, so be careful with that. If you settle on, that's a verb phrase we use sometimes. It just means you're deciding on something, you're arranging something, you're agreeing on something. Maybe you want to have a party and you settle on a place, a venue for your party.
Or you settle on a date for the party as well. And so she finally decided to use these ingredients for her substitute: broad beans, hazelnuts, apples, and canola oil.
Yeah.
And of course, she chose them not only because of their flavor and texture, but also because of their local availability.
There you go.
So I guess they were available in the UK. She didn't have to import other products, so it would be better for the environment that way. And this makes the Ecovado even more sustainable. As an added bonus, the wax skin of the fruit can even be melted down to form a candle. So when you're cooking your Ecovado, you can melt down the skin, make a candle, and then you'll have some light just in case the lights go out while you're eating this wonderful fruit.
And they may this winter, indeed. So this is somebody who's doing some thinking. I think we've got a lot of creative and clever students out there right now coming up with new ideas and new things to try. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. No Chinese teacher, guys. And then we'll be back to talk about Singapore and their urban farming. Welcome back, guys. It's our News Watch. We talked about a student in the UK who came up with a new design for a substitute for the avocado. So we're moving on now to Singapore, a neighbor here in Asia. And it says here in the headline, remember that's what it's called, a title in a newspaper or magazine is referred to as the headline, especially newspapers. Although we're not seeing a lot of newspapers actually printed these days anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Right, so of course we're talking about something going on in Singapore, and we also describe Singapore as being a concrete jungle, which means it's a city with lots and lots of buildings. And in that concrete jungle of Singapore, plants have begun to sprout in peculiar places. So if a plant starts to grow, we tend to use this word sprout. Basically, it grows roots and starts to grow, and you can see it. And land comes at a premium in Singapore, where 5.5 million people live on less than 730 square kilometers.
Wow.
Okay, so if something's at a premium, that means it's a high price. Land comes at a premium. In other words, if you try to sell land in Singapore, you're going to make a fortune if you do it, just like here in Taipei. Land comes at a premium here as well. And yes, there are a lot of people who live in Singapore only on 730 square kilometers. Oh, that's bigger than I thought it was. I thought it was only like 5 or 6 square kilometers. But I've never been there, so I don't really know.
We're using this word plot, because we're talking about these rooftop plots that have been leased to farmers, to talk about a small piece of ground. Usually when we talk about plot here at English Digest, it's usually a story that's involved in a movie or in a novel. But here it's just a piece of property. Yeah, I haven't been to Singapore yet, unfortunately, although I hear it has terrific food over there and a place that I don't want to miss. I hope to get over there at some point. But yeah, they have very little land to spread out on. So if you do get some land or are able to afford to buy or even rent an apartment, good for you. But it comes at a premium. It's very expensive. Since 2020, about a dozen rooftop plots have been leased to farmers. So they're taking those top levels and leasing them to people who can produce crops of food. If you lease something, you're not selling it, you're just renting it to someone for a specific period of time. I don't know about Taiwan, but in America, a lot of big companies that need to, they have salespeople that need to get around by car. They'll lease cars for them. And so every 2 or 3 years, they'll trade in that car. Usually they're leasing very expensive cars, but yeah, that's what lease means, to rent for a specific period of time.
Right, and they, of course, are leasing areas on tops of buildings.
Yeah.
So these are unusual agricultural developments, kind of strange farms, and they are supported by the government, which wants to increase domestic food production to 30% by the year 2030. So the government wants for Singapore to produce more food in the future, and this is one way they think they can do it. And planting on parking lot rooftops is thus a space-efficient way of meeting the government's goal. Now, of course, as you know, in cities with lots of people driving cars, they need to park their cars in parking lots, or car parks, as they're sometimes referred to. In this particular case, they're putting the plants or the farms on top of parking lots. And, of course, there it can save the space because normally the top of a parking ramp would be a roof that's just blank there with nothing on it. Or it would be open to the sky, but people don't like to park with their cars exposed to the elements if it rains or if it's sunny or something like that. So, of course, lots of parking lots have roofs. And hey, what the heck? Let's put a farm on that roof. Let's put that space to good use.
Yeah, even on my own apartment building where I live here, we've got lots of potted plants and trees that are on that rooftop, which is kind of fun for everybody. We can all go up there and enjoy. But if you put your car up there with no roof, it's hard on the paint, too. It's really tough on your car. So moving on to the next paragraph, it says, since this endeavor began in the midst of 2020's pandemic, it's unsurprising that it's had a bit of a slow start. Yeah, everything kind of ground to a halt. Everything kind of stopped during the pandemic. A lot of countries were in lockdown, meaning they couldn't go anywhere. So it kind of had a slow start getting going there. So even removing COVID-19 from the equation, farming is an expensive business. So even if you didn't have to consider COVID-19, you're still left with quite an expensive venture or endeavor here because farming is expensive business.
Right. Equation, of course, usually is in mathematics. It's like a formula. So, yes, indeed, if you don't consider COVID-19, then farming is an expensive business. Even if you remove COVID-19, it's still expensive anyway. The current rooftop farmers receive subsidies from the government. So when the government helps you out, they will give you subsidies, and that is necessary for a lot of things, especially when in regard to transportation. Like for many metro systems around the world, most of them lose money. They don't produce a profit, so they rely on subsidies from the government, or we could say government assistance. And because the government wants to increase food production in just a few years, well, they're helping people out by giving them money or giving them subsidies.
Right. Now, a subsidy is a noun, but if you use the verb, it's subsidize. Subsidize with a Z. So if you're getting a subsidy, it's just a sum of money usually that a government or maybe it's an arts organization that is giving you some sort of help. So it's a sum of money that's granted to you to help support something that doesn't always make a profit, or it's more expensive than people can really afford. Tom mentioned the high-speed rail here. I know the government...
Well, the metro system.
The metro system, too. Yeah, they have to subsidize that because it's quite expensive, and they want to keep it available for people who aren't millionaires to use. So, yeah, a lot of things are subsidized. Remember, solar panels, they had to subsidize those because they're so expensive that people can't afford them if they're not subsidized. So here, they're getting some extra help, some extra money from the government to help with these rooftop farms.
Now, here it goes on to say, however, some farms are showing impressive yields. So, yes, even though these farmers need assistance from the government, still, some of these farms are showing impressive yields. And a yield is the amount of food that you can produce from a farm. And so this means different levels of production from different farms, different yields. And, of course, when farmers have their harvests every year, they want to have a nice yield or a big amount of food that they produce so they can make more money that way. And one farm reports up to 400 kilograms of produce on some days, depending on the crop being harvested. So this is the example of one farm. On some days, they can produce up to 400 kilograms of produce.
Wow.
Be careful with that word because this is talking about plants that are used for human consumption. Produce. You might go to your local traditional market and buy some produce like carrots and vegetables, spinach, stuff like that. Those are examples of produce.
Right. If you go into a shopping center or supermarket, especially in the U.S., that's my experience, the produce is on the outside of the grocery store, right? The outside aisles, I should say. The inner aisles are all the packaged foods. But if you stay on the outside parts of the grocery store, it's usually the most healthy food you can buy. You can get your fruits and vegetables over there. The meats are usually on the outside, and so is the milk and cheese and things like that. The real food, as I like to call it. I do like the junk as well. Don't get me wrong. I do like that. So, yeah, they're actually producing quite a bit. Now, notice that when we say produce, we're referring to that noun, right? That means fruits and vegetables. It's a noun. So be very careful when you come across this word. Although I heard a British person pronounce it produce the other day. So
interesting.
Yeah, you'll hear all sorts of things, I'm afraid. So just get ready to be aware that this can sometimes mean actual fruits and vegetables, what something is sold in the grocery store. So it says here, realistically, though, if Singapore intends to meet its goal, it will need innovations and not just funding for more rooftop farms. Realistically, if you're being realistic, you're being practical. You're not being a dreamer or coming up with something that's, kind of a fantasy that you'll never be able to achieve. Sometimes parents, help their kids be a little bit more realistic when they're trying to come up with their careers. Most young kids want to be a pop star, famous movie star, astronaut. Maybe their parents know that perhaps that's not going to work out. So they help them try to be more realistic about what they can do in the future. Don't let people kill your dreams, but try to be a little bit more realistic when you come up with your goals.
Right, we're always told that if you work really hard, you can achieve your goals. But of course, sometimes these goals are too lofty. So you need to be realistic. Not everybody can be a rock star or a famous artist or a famous surgeon or something like that. So yes, you probably should have a plan B in mind. And a lot of people probably think, oh, it's going to be real easy to produce this food on rooftops, but they still need to be realistic. And here, realistic is being used as an adverb. So realistically, though, if Singapore intends to meet its goal, it will need innovations, not just funding for more rooftop farms. So an innovation is like a new idea, and I suppose rooftop farming is different from traditional farming in fields because you have to move the soil artificially onto the roof. You need to make sure it doesn't fall off the building, and you need to figure out a way to fertilize the soil. And the kinds of produce that you produce are going to be different in nature. So they probably need to come up with some different kinds of fertilizers and soils and things like that. They need to have some innovations.
Right. For example, I know they're doing some farming now without soil, which is kind of an interesting idea as well. Yeah, innovations are important in business everywhere, That's how you get new businesses started and continue to have a business grow because we need new things, new inventions, innovations all the time. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can reach their goal. I think most countries are going to need to start thinking about producing a lot more of their own food if we can't get the shipping to work out better than it is right now.
Exactly. Okay, that's a topic for another day, but that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. And now we're going to say farewell, and we look forward to seeing you next time. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
See ya.